Welcome to the Smoke Pit. Joining us today again, Geraint Jones, best-selling author and the co-writer of the new hit film MVP, just debuted and executive produced by Sylvester Stallone, involved Nate Boyer, Jay Glazer, just a ton of people, Randy Couture, absolutely phenomenal project. Welcome, Geraint, joining us from all the way from Wales, I believe.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, bro. And I believe today's a historic event, or historic occasion. It's the first time we've done a podcast together when I've been sober-ish. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, Geraint has been on the Smoke Pit before, and I have been on his podcast, Veteran State of Mind. Make sure you guys check that out as well. I remember doing our little pensive photo shoot in Norway after we recorded. Got the good lighting and the angles and the right amount of 1,000-yard stare. Like he was at, bro, you're at 998 yards. I need 1,000 yards.
We got there.
We got there. So tell us about your new movie.
Yeah, dude. I mean, it kind of snuck up on me, honestly. I remember at the time when I kind of like to rewind and to give a shout out to Tim from the Veterans Project, which is a super cool project that everyone should check out. He just said to me, like, you need to meet up with this guy, Nate Boyer. He's getting involved with like a lot of artistic endeavors, so to speak. And I was out in the States. And for anyone who doesn't know the charity MVP, or anyone who doesn't know Nate was a Green Beret, and then he went on to play for the Texas Longhorns. And then he went to the NFL, became the oldest rookie in the NFL at 34 years old, which is, someone who's now 39 years old and has no use of his knees and back and everything. I can say that that's a hell of an achievement, being able to like hang out with people who were just coming straight from college. And like Nate realized that there was a lot of parallels between what happens when veterans leave the service and what happens when athletes kind of leave the field. And like there's a line, and we got Tony Gonzalez in the movie. We got a few cameos, people playing themselves, like you mentioned, Randy Couture, he's in there, Tony Gonzalez, you've got Michael Strahan, a few other kind of people. We could talk a bit about how good NFL Network and people were to us. But yeah, essentially Nate realized that like a lot of these things that we go through, when you go through problems when you leave the military, people assume PTSD. And when you go through problems after playing football, people assume it's like some kind of like concussion thing. Whereas a lot of the time what it really is an identity crisis. You've probably grown up wanting to be a football player. You've grown up wanting to be a Marine or a soldier. And then you, like for a lot of us, you leave in your late 20s, mid 20s. Maybe even if someone does like the 20 years, you're still in like your late 30s. And then you've got, half your life ahead of you. And it's like, what the hell do I do? So Nate kind of identified that there was this commonality between the two professions. And, the great thing about America is, people look up to veterans, sometimes too much, honestly. And I think the same could be said to athletes. We look up to athletes too much maybe as well. But when you put the two of them in a room together, you've got one group telling the other group that they respect them. And that kind of means a lot. But it's also like what they do at MVP is they just get people together and they break a sweat together. And I think there's a lot to be said for, there's like talking's great, but getting on the mats with each other, hitting some pads with each other and running around with each other, does a lot to kind of form bonds and make you feel a part of something again. So they've been doing great work. And so I went out to one of these sessions. It takes place in Unbreakable Gym. Anyone that knows Hollywood, it's the, Pink Taco. It's just behind there. And it's owned by Jay Glazer, and he opens the place up to veterans on a Wednesday afternoon, I believe it is. Now they spread all over the country as well. Yeah, I went down to a session. I had a few ideas to pitch to Nate anyway. But then like the more I kind of got to know about the project, I was like, dude, like we need to do like a kind of like a fictionalized origin story about what you kind of got going on here. And like 40 hours later, we had the first draft. I was lucky at the time. I had a friend who was letting me use his place up in Hollywood, so I was just up the road from Nate. So it was really it was tough, bro. We sat by the pool, we drank beers, and we wrote a script. It was the hardship that we went through was unreal. And then Nate's one of these guys. Like Nate's one of these guys, bro. He gets into places like water can't get. Before you knew it, he had Braden Aftergood, who's the producer behind Wind River and Hell or High Water. He was on board. He's Sly Stallone's partner at Balboa Productions, and they wanted to get behind the film. And then Nate does what Nate does. and he corralled people in. We had Wiz Khalifa do a track for the movie,
Oh wow.
just because he believed in the cause. NFL Network let us film on their set. Michael Strahan gave us his time. Howie Long gave us his time. You know, we had like some cameos from great guys. Randy Couture's actually, he heads up one of the chapters. He heads up the Vegas chapter of MVP, which is super
Wow.
cool. As an
Yeah.
aside, I actually ended up sitting next to Randy Couture on a flight out of Vegas.
No
And
joke.
no joke. I was the last person to get on the plane. I hadn't been to bed like 3 days. And I sat next to him. I'm like, hey, you're in the movie I did with Nate. And he kind of looked at me. You're like, you okay? I'm like, nope. He's like, get some sleep, bro. So he kind of like puts me to sleep. And I wake up on the other side. He's just
like with,
he's just
like
like
a figure,
laughing at
like
me.
a with like a headlock. He put you to sleep,
Oh
or
yeah, he was like this guy has had way too much Vegas.
he's like, go
But
to
like we
sleep.
land on yeah, and
Just
like, you know,
dreams
when you
now.
like yeah, and I was probably like all twitchy. I woke up on the other side and he's just kind of still laughing. He was really cool guy. I mean, a mate. Just I was a fan of Randy. Like I don't really follow the UFC that much now, but like while I was serving, it was something that we'd all watch, you know, together.
Yeah.
So to have him on, it was pretty unreal. And same with Tony Gonzalez. That's somebody who I always enjoyed
Best
watching
tight
play
end
football.
ever play the game.
That ever played the game, bro. And I heard that he was like, because I actually listened to his podcast and I heard he wanted to get into acting. And so I did a little bit of sneaky. I basically lifted some of the stuff that he'd said word to word from his thing and put it in the script. So we sent it to him. He's like, this really speaks to me. It's like, yeah, it's because it's your words, bro. But he's a great dude. I'm really, really happy with him doing this time. And yeah, Nate kind of took the ball and ran with it, to use a pun. And my involvement largely kind of finished about, we do rewrites and stuff, but really we wrote the film like 5 years ago. And then it was down to Nate, his kind of determination to get the thing done.
Yeah.
Shot it on a really low budget. And the reason we were able to do that was because of the generosity of people like NFL Network, Jay Glazer giving us his gym to film in, that kind of thing. And we premiered it in Hollywood in September, which was fun. And then yesterday, which was the Veterans Day, it came out on demand on Prime, iTunes, and I think YouTube. I can't actually watch it because I'm in the States. Well, you can watch it over here. You got to use a VPN to watch it. But it's just been really cool, bro.
Allegedly.
So like it's been really kind of cool to do it. As with anything, you're very nervous when you put out a piece of work because, you think like, and it's the same, like I wrote it 5 years ago. So if I was to do it again today, it would be very, it would be different. But
I didn't see one TikTok reference or anything. You're behind the times, man.
Yeah, there's no TikTok references. I didn't plug my OnlyFans. It was, pretty poor effort. But
only guess.
it was we had the premiere and there was a Q&A at the end of it, and one of the people involved in the Q&A, her brother had he was a Marine who took his life, and she actually played herself in the movie, and she said that it helped her understand why her brother had done what he did, and that meant a lot. And to be honest, at that point, then I was like, well, I don't give a fuck what anyone else says. It's done its job.
Well, it is currently sitting at a 9.1 out of 10 on IMDb. So, well done.
Well, fuck whoever gave it less than 10, is all I can say. I will find you. I will make you eat your own feces.
And I will end you.
I have a set of skills which involve drinking and making you eat feces.
Yep. And so there are a lot of interesting behind the scenes facts about the movie. And, you mentioned that, Wiz Khalifa put a track down, and that they're all, these, really, really important and busy people who, gave their time and their energy and their efforts to making the film happen. But one of the things that I find the most interesting is that every veteran that was depicted on screen was played by an actual veteran,
and they can actually act, which was great. It wasn't one of those things of we're gonna like throw veterans in for the sake of throwing veterans in. So I mean, it's written by veterans, it's directed by a veteran. A lot of the some of the music was produced. People are familiar with Topher. He produced some of the tracks on it. He's an Air Force.
Topher's been on the podcast.
Oh, he's a good dude. And like,
Yeah.
so he did, I think he did 2 tracks for it. And like you said, a lot of the actors were veterans. So we try to get veterans in wherever possible, but it wasn't just like, all right, you're a veteran, here's the job. It's like you still had to earn the job. But I think that definitely kind of gave it, it certainly made me a lot more comfortable when veterans were willing to put their name to it, because I mean, as well, like there are differences between British and veterans as much as we do have in common. I don't. This isn't a disparaging remark, but I think there's a bit more sentimentality around it in America, which is good and bad in some ways. I think.
Yeah.
I think in the UK it is viewed a bit more as, and it is changing, to be honest, because as with everything, America leads the way on things. So I do feel like it's changing here in the UK, but
And I think
it's
part of
not.
that is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no. I was just going to say I don't think it's a film that would have worked in Britain. I think it is an American film, which I love because I am transatlantic. I am a
Yeah.
British person. I was born into a British body, but I identify as an American. So, you know,
Yeah. Identify as a drunk man in Vegas.
yeah, say drunk.
I think part of that is the fact where America kind of made they parted ways from Armistice Day, and there's Armistice Day, there's Remembrance Day, that is observed in our allied partners, and these are very solemn occasions. Everything is it's kind of depressing, if I might say so. I think obviously for good reason, because the wars were disastrous. They wrecked the generation. In America, we kind of made the switch to Veterans Day, and it kind of turned into more of a celebration, and it kind of turned into a holiday. And then you kind of turn that in with American commercialism, where it's just like, oh, now we have an excuse to give an extra discount for this used car lot, or now the electronics store has a gimmick to pitch, like, oh, for this Veterans Day we're giving this. And then one of the straws that kind of broke the camel back as far as the way of separation is we started having places like Applebee's and Chili's giving out small free meals on Veterans Day, and it kind of completely changed the course of the way we think about the holiday here in the States.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because it was the same war. I mean, don't get me wrong, you guys came off the bench pretty late, but won't hold that against you. But no, I mean, every village you go to in the UK has a memorial with like 100 names on it. So like you said, like, it really did kind of wipe out almost an entire generation of young men, especially in the First World War, and then to a lesser extent in the Second World War, but still to a massive degree. I mean, so it's something it is a somber occasion, but I think that we do it right because it's like the big the remembrance event held at the Albert Hall. It's the festival of remembrance, and there's I've been lucky enough to go down to one of those festivals, and there's moments down there that'll someone's chopping onions and you're trying to keep your best stoic face going, but then there's bits like the Royal Marines band will come out and you're like, yeah, bumping along to some great band music. So it's a remembrance. You're remembering the war dead, but at the same time you're celebrating what they gave you. And even as someone who's quite cynical about the causes of war, I still, that does not detract at all from remembering what people went and did. They went for their country, and people can pick apart why that was, but the intentions of the people who went were pure, and they need to be remembered for that. And I think there's been a bit of a resurgence. I think Iraq and Afghanistan kind of brought it back into, because you had this new generation of veterans who'd actually seen war, and that's not to disparage anybody who was in Northern Ireland or anything like that, but Northern Ireland kind of had this, because it was on British soil and things. I think there was always a bit of ill feeling around it, which kind of still persists because those guys went and did their best in remarkably difficult circumstances. But I feel like Afghanistan especially was a war where people were like, oh, it's like, and again, you can break this down, but the public perception was good guys, bad guys. And that pulled
kind of different
people,
than like something with like the Falklands.
Yeah, I mean, the Falklands, another good one. The thing is, the Falklands, it was over quite quick, and it didn't involve Like, it was only like a small percentage of the military that went down there. Whereas like,
Mhm.
Afghanistan, lasted long enough that every regiment kind of went through there. And because
Yeah.
we recruit quite locally, that meant that every town has some kind of connection to it. Like you're not going to find Falklands veterans like everywhere across the UK in the same way that you'll find Afghanistan veterans everywhere across the UK. But I think one of the things with Afghanistan and Iraq is, units came back and they marched through the towns, and it was out in the open. And we're also a generation that, we have podcasts. We're more willing to speak about things. Whereas I think in the past, it was still that kind of attitude of you go off, you do it, and like you just, you keep quiet about it. I actually met a Falklands veteran who was on the Sir Galahad, which is a ship that got bombed while the troops were still on board it. Horrific incident. And I said to him, I was like, obviously no pressure, but if you ever wanted to come and talk on the podcast, no, just, no. But I mean, he had no problem talking about it in the pub, but it was that next step to like talking about it in the pub was one thing, but taking the step to, it's like, wouldn't want to publicly talk about it because I think they still feel that it's like, that's just not the done thing, which I understand. I can totally understand the reasoning behind that. The problem with that is if you don't talk about something, you can't expect then the public to know about it and to show up for events like Remembrance Day, because why would they if they don't understand it, if they've never talked about it or heard about it?
If they don't have the direct connection to it, it's harder for them to care, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And like, it's just the same as anything. If somebody doesn't talk about something, like very recently, I've kind of like, I've been fortunate that none of my friends of my age group have suffered from, say, cancer and things. And in this last year, I've met a couple of people who have, and now that's more on my mind because all of a sudden I have a direct connection. It involves people that I care about, and that's just life. It's nothing. It's nothing disparaging from the civilian population. If they don't know, they don't know, and that goes for the same of us of everything.
And I think that's a very good point to make, where you care about things that you have more of a direct connection to, and so whether it's your friend's mental health, or whether it's their successes or their failures, having that direct connection it makes it a little bit easier to care about. Because kind of like, if I see like a random baby picture online, it's just like, oh, baby, I don't care, like, good for you. But if it's my friend who had the baby, I'm like, hey, happy for you, like, now it's not as weird to get excited.
Yeah.
But yeah, having that direct connection to somebody kind of makes all the difference. Like, for example, I have read Brothers in Arms, I've read Legion, I've read Sugarman, I have watched MVP. Like, these are all things that you have done. These are the books that you have written or movies that you have written. And having that direct connection to you made me seek out those things and read them. And I got to enjoy the craftsmanship and the quality of work behind it, as where perhaps maybe I had never heard of those books because we hadn't been introduced or something. I maybe wouldn't have had the chance to enjoy those. But it's kind of weird because, like, since you and I have been friends for years, reading your books, like, I can almost kind of feel like when you're smirking at certain lines, or like when there's certain anger in certain parts,
Oh, mate, like, I don't read back the books that I've done, but obviously I can remember them. And I know that if you take the first book and kind of work to the newest, the anger levels probably come down quite a bit. Like, I just did, I can't really say what the book was yet because I wrote it with somebody else, but all I'll say is I did a book this summer that we're just kind of wrapping up at the moment, which really kind of just made me see things in a bigger picture. And it's like the last couple of years, I was getting quite very angry about, we had like the rolling lockdowns and stuff here and things, and it was making me very kind of angry. And it's been great to do this project over the summer because it's really kind of made me feel like I really don't have any problems. It's like, like everyone has problems that they can point to, right? And things are relative. So if something's a big deal to you, it's a big deal to you. But that's why it's like really kind of it's great to work on something that just gives you that perspective and just kind of be like, okay, yeah, well, yeah, I might have some things going on, but it could be way worse.
Yeah. And it's been particularly difficult over the last few years because, as MVP demonstrates, sometimes having that that environment, that locker room, that sense of community where you can hang out with other people, you can share your thoughts and your feelings, and be in a like-minded environment can really be therapeutic for a lot of people. And so, with a lot of the lockdowns and the way that the world has been recently, it's been harder to do that. And so, I would say generally, the mental health of our community, the combat veteran community, the veteran community, first responder community, people who kind of have that, others over self mindset in their profession, has suffered because you haven't had the ability to come together and to commiserate and to vent and to laugh as much as we have had in previous years.
Yeah, and that's a very human thing too. I mean, in the UK, suicide rates went up, alcoholism went up, drug abuse went up, domestic violence went up. So it's a human need to get together and vent and to laugh and to have all these, like there's a reason that like pubs and bars have become so fucking popular and institutionalized in our cultures, because people need to get together. And whether it's like,
No man is an island.
no man is an island, not even The Rock, and he is pretty island-like. But like, whether it's telling your sob story to a barmaid, or like just meeting some random people and becoming best friends and then never speaking to them again, like we're social creatures. And so I don't blame myself or anyone else for getting more angry or for getting these gray hairs in the beard that you pointed out earlier. It's just
Hey, I didn't say that on air. You outed yourself.
Well, people need to know who you really are. So it's but they make me look distinguished, mate. So, but no,
Yeah.
it's cool, mate. It's like wherever anything, you go through something, you come out the other side, and there's pros and cons from it. Some things you were taken away, and then whenever something's taken away from you, you get given something in return if you're willing to be open to it.
Mm. And we had spoken in the past about the concept that there is kind of a particular sense of humor and a certain bond that you get from being around other veterans that you may not always necessarily get from other people. And one of the things that you had spoken to in your book, Brothers of Arms, is that sometimes that people will take your biggest insecurity and turn it into your nickname.
Oh yeah.
And it's kind of good because you have to face it, and you face something over and over, and it doesn't hurt as bad. It doesn't sting as much when you hear it so often. But at the same time, it's because you have that sense of brotherhood that they're allowed to say those things. Somebody else could call out your biggest insecurity, and it's just like, you got me. But then somebody at a pub says that, and then now it comes to fisticuffs.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that existed when jobs across society were maybe more tough and formed a bond. Like if you were working in a steelworks or a coal mine or something like that,
Mm.
I feel like that had that same sense of hardship. Therefore, it had that same kind of community and things. And without trying to sound like too like old man about it, I do think that like it's like most things. There's like the lockdowns and stuff. As much as I didn't agree with them, I could understand maybe some of the ideas behind them. And the same with these things about not like in the army now. They're trying to cut back on quote unquote banter because some people get upset by it, and I think those are like laudable goals, but at the same time these things exist for a reason, right? And my thing with the military has always been like, if you can't take insults from your friends, you're definitely not going to deal well with taking fire from an enemy, because that is very personal. And I do think I think the kind of behavior that we know Marines and infantry guys for, the kind of things that go in the barracks, those things I think have developed and existed for a reason. And I've always said, like, if you can't piss on your mate's leg in the shower, how are you going to stick your fist in his fucking leg when half of his leg's missing and you're trying to plug the arterial wound? It's,
Yeah.
I think that these things have developed for a reason, and we kind of get rid of them at our peril. And it's not a thing of like making people soft. It's just like, well, hang on a minute. This thing's been around for a long time. Okay, yeah, there's a few people who take it very badly, and we need to look out for those people. But maybe there's a reason behind this, which isn't just that it's funny, which it is, but maybe there's a reason behind this, which is actually kind of necessary for us to perform our mission.
That's very true. You mentioned in the forward of Brothers of Arms that in hindsight, maybe some of the jokes and some of the banter would not be considered appropriate in these days, but you didn't want to change things. You wanted it to really hold true to the way that the conversations actually were, because that's how it was in the time. And obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but at the end of the day, it was important to acknowledge that these jokes were being made for a reason. This is what the culture was like at the time. This is what was appropriate at the time. This was what was permissible because of the relationship between the people um, in the firm, and just like uh, it was okay then. And so to go back now and look at it through a politically correct lens and try to judge it or try to change it would not be authentic to the sacrifices that you guys were making in the time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the other thing that I kind of like push back with the editor on is like, this book is about killing people.
Mm.
Like, it's about as offensive as it gets. And that's kind of the funny thing. It's like, when it comes to the book, they're never like, oh, well, can we take out these stories about killing people? It's like, well, can we take out this like insult that he used to this guy? It's like, this book is about taking another human being's life, like that. It kind of see like, if we're willing to do that, then making a joke about somebody's race or their sexual orientation or their looks or whatever it is, probably not that big of a deal compared to the fact that we're killing people.
Yeah, and it was kind of refreshing to read some of these things, because so much of the content that we consume today is put through the politically correct meat grinder, and then the product that is formed and shaped and packaged and shipped off has to meet these quality control standards. And there was a few times where I would hit pause on the audiobook and just kind of chuckle to myself, or I would text somebody because it would spark a memory of a similar situation that I was in. And so it was refreshing. It was a bit of a balm, a salve, if you will, on the hurt that still exists in my soul.
Well, I'm glad you say that, bro. Except for the hurt on your soul bit, but one of the reasons I did the
A little
book
sad,
is,
mostly good.
yeah, it's like, I wasn't special forces. I wasn't the first man on the balcony on the Iranian embassy or anything like that. But then most of us weren't. And I thought most of us were trudging around the same bit of ground, poking around for IEDs, occasionally getting in a firefight, and that was the reality for the majority of infantry soldiers who went through Iraq and Afghanistan. That was our reality. The day in, day out, go out, look for shit, hopefully not get blown up, come back, do it tomorrow. And like that was one of the reasons I wanted to do the book. It was some of my favorite books from the Second World War. They're not the books about the SAS in, Libya and stuff, as much as I enjoy those stories. Someone was just these guys. There's a guy, George MacDonald Fraser, great author, Lance Corporal in the Second World War in Burma. And, he was a part of these masterful battles conducted by General Slim. And, now you look at it and the historians will break down like all these kind of like masterful kind of strokes and feats of logistics and, kind of like the way that he took on this powerful Japanese army. But for the blokes who were there at the time, all they knew that they were trudging through the jungle and occasionally getting shot at, so it's like we kind of lose, like if it's not for people like George MacDonald Fraser, we lose what it was like. That battle, they'll come out at the end. There was 50,000 troops involved and there was 500 casualties or whatever like that. And then it's like, but what was it like for that guy who was hacking his way through the jungle and then occasionally like being like, oh fuck, it's a Jap, like that those are the kind of things that's always fascinated me. I mean, the big picture fascinates me too, don't get me wrong, but it means nothing without the experiences of the guys involved. Like that to me it's why I wrote Legion, because we have no records from your average Roman soldier. I mean, I would fucking kill to read an account of a guy who'd followed Caesar around on campaign. We have Caesar's accounts, but we don't have any of the guys that actually held the shields and did the stabby stab. And those are the guys that I'd really like to hear from.
Yeah, to find out what it was really like. And so you narrated Brothers in Arms. And so when I queued up the audiobook for Legion, I was kind of expecting to hear your sultry tones come through my headphones, but it wasn't. And I gotta say, no, obviously, no disrespect to you, but the guy who narrated Legion might possibly have the sexiest voice I've ever heard.
You know, he's like, have a guess what his nationality is.
Not a clue.
He's actually an American,
Is he?
but yeah,
Oh,
but
so
he
you're
does a
telling me that he's
great.
not Roman?
No, he lives in California, but he was great. Jared Lamaster, really, really cool, super cool dude. So, and I actually self-published Legion originally and self-published the audiobook. So that was all kind of like, that was my little experiment. It's now with a publisher. I did the first couple of books in the Roman series with Penguin, and then I was just kind of like, you know what, I'm going to try doing one of my own because, you know, a bit of an ego, and I think like I could probably do it better. And it was cool, bro. But like the narrating Brothers in Arms, I felt like that was important because it was a personal book, but that will probably be the one and only book that I ever narrate. It was not a process that I enjoyed.
I can imagine that it's not, because just going back and like having to edit these podcasts and listen to my own voice for hours and hours on end kind of makes me want to repaint the wall. But
Well, we had editors, but you're sitting in a goldfish bowl with three total strangers looking at you as you reread your most intimate, painful moments of your life. It was, and like, you do it for 3 days. And when we finished it, I got on a plane. I disappeared to Edinburgh for 3 days. You know, so it was very emotionally draining.
yeah,
It's emotionally draining to write something that's personal, but I discovered that it's a lot more draining to then reread it, especially with like strangers looking at you. Oh, and don't get me wrong, they were fucking fantastic, but you
but
know, they
still,
made, but still, you know, and
yeah, the
like
doctor
every
might
time.
be super professional, but if I got to spread my cheeks for a hemorrhoid exam, it's still going to be a little uncomfortable and a little personal.
That's probably a great analogy for it. That's kind of how it felt.
So I have book 2 and 3 of the Raven and Eagle series on the way, because after I finished reading Legion, I was just like, it wasn't a super cliffhanger that it was left on. Like it was like a satisfying conclusion, but I'm definitely very interested to see where the story goes from there. And so the idea that you wrote this book from the perspective of somebody who was in the Legion, somebody who was on the ground, and not like some high fluting commander, but from somebody like you said that had the shield and the sword. Um, where did you feel like you drew most of your inspiration for that?
Um, Honestly, bro, I think it came from reading a. I'm really into reading memoirs from enlisted personnel, Vietnam memoirs, Second World War memoirs. You know, to up until our wars. And unfortunately, like there's not that there's a great book called, I think, Recollections of Rifleman Harris, which is a Napoleonic Wars one. But it's very hard to find enlisted accounts past the First World War.
Mm.
But what I kind of realized reading them was that I'm very much a believer of, even though the wars changed, the spirit of the soldier just seems to me. I've just read enough at this point to convince me that the character of soldiers doesn't really change that much over time. And why would it? I mean, humans are humans. It's one of the things I got. So, like, my character, he doesn't have like necessarily PTSD. People want to put a label on it, but he is somebody that questions what they're doing and definitely suffers from the loss of comrades. And I had people push back in the historical community, like, "Oh, there's no evidence that Roman soldiers have PTSD." Well, yeah, we also have no accounts from Roman soldiers. So, like, the idea that there's not, we didn't even talk about it with the First World War generation, the Second World War generation. So they're like, well,
Yeah,
there's no evidence of it. And my thing is, I looked at Mexico, where violence is endemic in a lot of the parts, and you've got kids growing up finding bodies with the fucking heads and arms and stuff chopped off. And actually, in those areas now, PTSD is endemic as well as the violence. So I think this idea that, it's the other one is like, say, child mortality. People always say like, well, people used to lose kids, so they were used to losing people. And there's a difference between being used to losing people and okay with losing people. Like, if we were okay with the fact that our babies used to die all the time, why would we have put in all the effort we did to reduce infant mortality? It doesn't make sense. We
yeah,
reduced it because it was an issue to people. And again, you can find accounts from people, since the Industrial Revolution, who lost their kids and were never the same people again. And it
yeah.
happened to mothers in the Second World War. They lost their kids. First World War. They lost their kids. They were never the same again. So
And
I
if you
think the
look through
idea.
other,
So go
I'm
ahead, bro.
sorry, go ahead. I was just say
No, I
real
was
quick,
just
if
going to
you
say,
look
mate.
through
So,
like certain historical texts that have are really old, like for various religious texts or various uh, older ancient texts, there are examples of parents being very distraught about their children passing.
yeah, exactly. And why wouldn't they be? Like, I think people get this idea that we're different human beings now, and I think it's, especially if you've been on fucking operations, you see that people, it's, yeah, we can be different to a degree when we're living in the West and we have a lot of these things. But like, you start to take, like, what's that thing? Like, we're only like 3 meals away from anarchy or something.
Yeah,
I mean, fuck, bro. We saw people fighting over toilet paper. Like, we really are not different people to who we were 2,000 years ago. If I was to put on in our local football club here, if I was to put on gladiator fights tomorrow, I would sell out that fucking stadium in an hour. People, like, look at the movie. Look at the movies that we watch. Look at, everything is about action. Everything is about violence. Not everything, but a high proportion are. And like, people are people, and people have been people for a long time. And I'm a big believer, if you took a Marine now and dropped him in a Roman section 2,000 years ago, eventually, it would be a bit different, but he'd find his feet. And I think if you took a
I
Roman and
agree.
dropped him in a Marine section, he'd find his feet.
Well, that's particularly true because we get people from all over the world who are still trying to learn English as their second language, and they get dropped into Paris Island or San Diego, and they find their feet.
Right.
We've had I've served with guys that they're like, yeah, I left Guatemala to escape gang violence when I was 6, and now they're in the military, and they're just like anybody else in their unit. Or yeah, my parents fled Vietnam during the evacuation, and we moved to America because we didn't want to be under that regime, and now they're joining the U.S. military, and no different than anyone else. And I completely agree with you that there would be a little bit of a learning curve, but then you kind of assimilate into the tribe. And I think it's also telling that you can have some, kid from a village or a town that has never seen any violence, that, grew up with mom, dad, 3 square meals a day. And then they're serving right next to somebody who grew up in an inner city, and they had experienced violence and hardships. And then within a few months of being on tour, you can't really tell them apart. They're both kind of salty now, and they kind of
Mm-hmm.
have the same conditioning and seasoning, where their origins are vastly different. And I think that is really kind of well highlighted in Legion, where you have the Roman soldiers who are the professional soldiers. They're the ones who do that for a living, and they're good at it. And then you have the rebels that are in the area, that they're not professional soldiers. The way that they interact with each other, the way that they fight, their discipline, that's different. But then as the campaigns and the battles progress, you can kind of see the rebels starting to function more like the professional soldiers, because you have to temper that steel for it to survive.
Right. And I think that's the other thing as well when you write in historical fiction is, you know, the principles of war haven't changed. The principles of war haven't changed. And, we think of guerrilla war, and we kind of think of it being invented in, like, the Vietnam War, or, kind of like the end of empire and things. And really, like, look, if you were taking on the Roman army, which was at the time, the most professional, well disciplined, like almost unbeatable in the field,
Mm-hmm.
and you were a rebel army, well, you're not going to try and meet them on their own terms. You're going to harass supply lines. You're going to try and murder people when they go out for a drink. It's going to be all that kind of stuff, and that might not be documented, but you can bet your house on it that that's going to what's going to happen. Because why wouldn't it have? Why wouldn't it have happened? And there's a few accounts
Yeah.
that kind of there's a few accounts from, so the period I wrote about was like a bit of a little known period. It's like right at the early imperial days, and it all took place around Bosnia and these kind of areas. And you got these mountainous areas with like really steep passes. It's perfect guerrilla territory. And these historians from the period, people like Tacitus, they reference the fact that it was a long drawn out bloody war. Well, why was it a long drawn out bloody war? Because very rarely would the rebels actually come to battle. But the
Yeah.
Romans had to deploy. I think at the peak they had 15 legions there, which is about
Oh,
half of all the
wow.
available Roman strength. Yeah, I think it was 15 at
Yeah.
the peak. And
For
then
such a
generals being
small
generals.
area,
Yeah, it was exactly, bro. We're talking about a small area, but
fewer
like they
legions
had to.
conquered way more in other examples.
Exactly, but very rarely in that, like, that period, was there actually, there was a couple of pitched battles, but it was pretty rare, generally speaking. But it drew on. It was bloody. It would have been it would have been patrol the mountain pass, hold the pass open, burn a village, get attacked at night, lose a couple of blokes. It would have been that brutal guerrilla war. And again, I yes, I'm kind of filling in blanks, but it's filling in blanks from just looking at the kind of the history that we have available to us, modern and ancient, and just thinking like, well, what is the likely thing to have gone on here?
Because there are plenty of examples of people who tried to stand toe to toe with Roman legions in open battle and failed miserably. And so, if you are looking historically speaking, the majority of the people who did that, particularly in the time period that you're referencing, they lost. So you're absolutely right. What is the most probable course of action that occurred if a smaller enemy force was able to sustain um, a long bloody campaign? And you look at other references in history where we kind of have like Afghanistan, and I try not to get mad at things, but you see these kids that are online, and they talk about like, oh yeah, like America lost in Afghanistan. I was like, I don't think that you can say that the military lost. Like, oh, farmers with bolt action rifles destroyed the most powerful military. I'm like, no, they didn't. We
Yeah, they didn't
lost
destroy. Yeah, they didn't
2,500.
destroy the military, but they definitely
Yeah,
outlasted it and outlasted the
yeah,
political willpower. And that was kind of what
exactly.
happened in this Roman war, because much like Iraq, where one minute it's like, hey, this week we got the Sunnis on our side, and then next week it's like, no,
Mm,
no, now it's the Shias on our side.
yeah.
This war was the same. You had these different tribes who they would actually go to war with each other at times. During the time they were at war with Russia, with Rome, they would also go to war with each other, and that was kind of how the war was won in the end. Was because these tribes ended up disagreeing and going to war with each other, and Rome kind of leaned on that. But I think it says a lot that
Mhm.
they ended up granting clemency to the rebels in the end, and to the rebel general, and he ended up seeing out his days in Italy. Now they're not going to do that if they're in a position of domination. That is it's kind of like what we've done in Iraq. Like we fucking Muqtada al-Sadr. I mean, how many American and British lives were lost to the Jaish al-Mahdi? A fucking lot. But
Mhm.
then we kind of like, okay, well, now we got to do business with this guy. You got to be pragmatic about it. And same as kind of we've done in Afghanistan.
And I mean, gosh, look at us. Like a couple hundred years ago, the crown was not too happy with the colonies, and now we follow to each
Listen,
other into a dozen different conflicts.
that's it,
And
mate.
so,
Allegiances shift very easily in politics.
and I think that is one of the reason why America has been able to be the way that it is because America has a very long history of turning enemies into allies. Countries that we have fought against at one point in time have become some of our greatest allies. And moving forward, the possibility of like, imagine, God forbid, where there's another large scale campaign, like imagine being just like an old man and turning on the news, and it's just like, the Taliban has sent 4 battalions of Marines to reinforce an Army Ranger regiment off the coast of Antarctica. And it's just like, how mind-blowing would that be?
Well, I mean, look, man, their forerunners were our allies. Like, so in the 80s, I mean, it's really not that much of a thing, right? Like, I do think like Iraq is a great example of it. Um, the shift in like, just the way we teamed up with the Sunnis when it suited us, we teamed up with the Shias when it suited us. And then again in Syria, same kind of thing happened.
Yeah.
We were sending weapons to Al Qaeda affiliated like units out there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
Taking
web,
it back 20, 30 years, at one point in time, we're backing Iraq. Another point in time, we're backing Iran. They go to war, 1 million people die. And it's just like, I think that if America maybe stopped meddling as much in other affairs, we'd all be better off. But at the same time, it's just like you don't stay on top by being reactive. You stay on top by being proactive. And maybe those schemes kind of help our way of life a little bit in kind of a very backhanded sort of way. But at the same time, like if as a citizen you look at where the money's going, where our troops are going, where our efforts are going, where our political endeavors are going, and you have questions. And so I know that you feel very passionate about this. How do you reconcile the difference between loving your country and loving the people you served with, but not agreeing with the policy that necessarily sent your comrades into harm's way?
I think it comes down to recognizing the difference between patriotism and nationalism. Kind of nationalism is you think your country is the best on the planet. It's above all criticism. Anything it does is justified. And I think patriotism means that you love your country. You're grateful for what you've got in your country. You're grateful for what people have built before you, which I certainly am. But it's the same way that you should look at yourself as a person and just say, like, look, I can love who I am, but I got work to do. And like some of the things I do are fucked up. And I think that, if we never criticized the way things are done, we'd still be doing things the way that they were done 1,000 years ago. So I think being self-critical, whether that's as a human being or as a nation, is incredibly important. I don't think there's any doubt that the military is used for sometimes, let's say, less than honorable purposes. But I think, like you said, mate, like when I look at, all I need to do is look at how so I have this conversation with civilian friends quite often, especially when it starts getting late after a few drinks. People like, like they're like, wasn't it a bit fucked up that the kind of country did and stuff interfere in these places? I'm like, well, yeah, it kind of is. But at the same time, what I can tell you is that when we went on patrol, we treated those kids and stuff and the locals better than the people that lived there did. And, I think that's kind of how you got to look at it. Like I can say that we weren't going around doing the whole village. We were going around giving the whole village fucking sweets, notebooks and pencils, and we generally cared. We cared about those people. At the same time, we also have to admit that, we cheered when we dropped bombs on people's houses, and like a mud-walled compound might not look like a house to us, but it's still a house. It's someone's home, and if someone had said to you like, "Hey, we can do an A10 run on this place, or we can just walk away and leave it," you'd be like, "A10 run." And then A10. Another one. Yeah. And then all the A10s.
And then
bring all the A10s. Yeah. Yeah. So like, so we have to be honest about it as well. But at the end of the day, maybe that's kind of part of being young. You don't think about those things. And if you did, you probably wouldn't be there. There's a reason they recruit people young. It's not just the physical robustness. A lot of it is like the lack of kind of mental maturity. Like, you wouldn't have got along very well if you're like, well, actually, somebody lives in that place and we shouldn't be dropping it. Shut up. Get the J down.
Yeah, imagine the geopolitical ramifications of the region. We're bringing down property values, and
well, we're not just bringing down property values. We're destroying someone's home, and they've had that home for hundreds of years, and now they're homeless. But we all get our video cameras out and go, woo. Because it is cool.
Yeah, and somebody's just like, well, you shouldn't have let them shoot at us from your house. And it's not that simple at all.
Yeah, you should have just let them shoot all your kids and then let us J down your house. I mean, fuck.
Yeah, you should have got both. Yeah. And it is a very difficult thing to reconcile when you kind of think about the idea where, you look back at some of the lies that were told by those in elected office and some of the hypocrisies, and whether it comes down to like one example where you had in your book where your chain of command had lied about the provisions that they were giving for holidays, and they were on the news talking about how they're taking care of the troops, but from that rifleman perspective, that just wasn't the case. And so how do you reconcile the idea of being mad at hypocrisy and lies and mismanagement and incompetence, but then also just having a raging boner at the memory of some of the best firefights that you've been in?
I think it just comes down to two things, like fair play and accountability. So we never expected to have a fucking Christmas dinner delivered to us in Helmand province. We don't expect that. But then don't lie and say that that's what's happening, At the same time, with accountability, if we have a fucking negligent discharge, we get fined a month's pay because we should be accountable for that. And I've had this conversation with a friend before who didn't believe that was a fair thing. And I said, well, I actually think that it is a fair thing, because if you have a negligent discharge into your friend's fucking face, then, that has changed that person's life forever. It's changed their family forever. So there should be a harsh punishment for it. There should also be a harsh punishment for an instance like the drone strike after the suicide bombing in Kabul, which took out an entire family. There should be accountability for that. At the very least, people should resign or lose their positions. You could make an argument that they should be worse than that. But at the very least, it should be, hey, we had this, because they came out quite openly and said there was confirmation bias. They could see kids on target for 2 minutes beforehand. They said that it was an immediate threat, but the guy's getting out of his car and going into a house, miles away from the airport. There should be accountability for that, and I think we can have both. I don't think it reduces lethality by I think, especially when you're fighting a insurgency where you're trying to get the population on your side, it should always be err on the side of caution. Unless we don't know that this guy, like, we've seen a guy doing some with the ground. Well, this is a fucking agricultural area. People do stuff in the ground. That's the nature of the area. Are we like, where is he doing it? Is this a choke point where we go through all the time? Have we seen this guy before? What kind of time of day is it? Like, are there other people around? Is he got like lookouts out? Like, let's look at the big picture. And if we're not sure, let's just err on the side of caution. We've seen where he is. So like, let's say he is implanting an IED. Well, we know where he is. So that IED right now is not a fucking threat to anybody because we know where it is. I mean, obviously, you can make the argument that someone's got to go and clear it, which is a fair argument. But if we go and fucking shoot one of the village elders now, the whole point of us being here, we've now lost that fucking village. That village is now sympathetic to the Taliban. And when the Taliban were rolling through Afghanistan and people were like, well, I can't believe how quick they're going through, kind of tried to explain to people, like, look, these people don't necessarily want the Taliban in charge, but you have to look at it from their perspective, because most of the fighting in Afghanistan took place at the same places, right? You were in Sangin, I was up in Musakala. Those places were fought over all the time. And at some point, the villagers just like, look, I get that these other people might be fucking harsher than you are, but I just want my house to not be a fucking front line anymore. And like, why wouldn't that be the logical solution? Like, what are we willing to give up in this country, for democracy? We weren't even willing to really give a proper troop deployment. So how can we ask their civilians to live on a fucking front line for the best part of 20 years? It's just, it's very kind of it's very kind of like grandiose of us to think that it's like that these people would go through that when we're not willing to do it ourselves. It's like, well, like we're not very good at putting ourselves in the shoes of like local populations.
I completely agree with you, and I think that when we talk about what's fair and what's right and what's appropriate in situations, and we have to also kind of examine some of our own iniquities and biases and things like that in a situation where we were in a prolonged campaign where we had an air force, we had drones, we had air support, we had medevac helicopters. Our enemies did not. Mm-hmm. And so if we have to sometimes have that voice of reason to say, hey, are we going to create more insurgents with this action because of a knee-jerk reaction that we only know about because we have such a decisive action? We are so willing to fry a PFC rifleman for a moment decision that was made in a split-second decision that was made in a moment of panic with life and death on the wrist. They pulled the trigger on the wrong person, and now they go to the brig, and now their career is over. Now they're going to spend the rest of their life in jail because of a situation like that. But we have an instance like this drone strike where we had eyes on for a prolonged period of time. There was no immediate danger to that person who was behind the joystick. There's no immediate danger to the person who authorized the decision or the 5 people above that probably have to sign off on it. But yet we expect the PFC 19-year-old who was there with 100 pounds on their kit in 110-degree weather, 40 degree Celsius, I think, if that converts right. They're scared. They've been in firefights. They've lost friends. There's sweat in their eyes. They see something. They make a momentary decision, and it was a bad call, and now they're going to be in the brig for the rest of their life. But yet somebody who is experienced, has lots of brass on their shoulders, is from a place of comfort, a place of intelligence, analysis, resources, safety, and then they make a bad call, and there's no responsibility, there's no accountability for a situation like that. That doesn't bode well. How can you be more critical of somebody who makes a decision that costs a lot less in ramifications and who's not supposed to be in that decision-making seat? There's a reason why PFCs don't lead brigades. There's a reason why Lance Corporals don't authorize big missions, because they're not supposed to make those decisions. But the people who are expected to have the maturity, the experience, and the authority to make those decisions are often the ones who are held the least accountable.
Man, I agree. And like, you know, and again, there's an argument for and against this, but I've heard that like in the Marine Corps, if you get a DOI, your career is effectively over, you know, and you can make an argument for and against that. Personally, I lean against, but the idea that like blowing on a fucking breathalyzer test should cost you a career and wasting a family who had nothing to do with, and I think that the tragedy of that Kabul drone strike as well was this is a family that had bought into the American idea, you know, worked for an American NGO, wanted to move to America, you know, they believed in what, like, they believed in the cause, and for what, wiping that family out, like less repercussions than a DUI. I mean, that doesn't stand like a morality test. It doesn't stand a logic test. I think it's quite terrible. And, you know, when we look at, there's over 40,000 civilian casualties in the Iraq war. You know, that's more than 10 9/11s. And like, you know, again, I think we were justified in going into Afghanistan initially, but, you know, it seems, and this is something I kind of think strongly about, you know, with Remembrance Day and stuff, is we need to remember those people too, because those weren't bad guys. Those are fucking people. I saw a report out the other day, you know, Britain had paid for something like 150 kids killed in a certain amount of years. They paid out like 150 grand. So there's not like a financial incentive not to kill civilians. Doesn't seem to be like a, when you get to the higher levels, there doesn't seem to be a moral incentive. You know, this whole term collateral damage is a very nice way of saying a fucking kid got his fucking head blown 100 meters in different directions to his body. And if we are going to say that we're the good guys, if we are going to say that we're going around, I guess it's very nice to say that, oh, we're standing up for democracy and that kind of thing. But it's like, well, that's fucking great. But the reality of the situation is that we just killed fucking tens of thousands of fucking civilians. And, you know, if at the end of that you get something which was worth those, that you could say, you know what, fucking tens of thousands of civilians died, but for the millions left, they now have unequivocally a better life. You can make an argument for it. But when you leave with the Taliban replacing the Taliban and those 40,000 civilian dead, it's very, at the very least, people should not be progressing. The people that were calling the shots there, at the very least, should not be in those positions anymore. And obviously that does not happen.
And it's not good incentive to ask the next generation to make sacrifices similar to the generation sacrifices that we've made, that Vietnam and other, you know, World War II generations made. It's not good incentive to ask future generations to make similar sacrifices when, you know, our leaders have had such a history of mismanaging those resources, which are human lives.
Right. And I think that's kind of part of it. It's like, and I think it's worth stating as well that I would go back and do it all over again in a fucking heartbeat. Even knowing what I know now. Why? Because machine guns are fun. They're so much fun. But this is kind of the responsibility you have when you know you have a bunch of people who want to go out and get after it. You have a responsibility to make sure you point them in the right direction for the right reasons. They're supposed to be adults in the room, and they were not there.
You know, I don't think there's a coincidence that a male orgasm lasts about as long as a good machine gun burst should.
That's some pretty long bursts, bro. Well, I used to. I'm getting on a bit now. The Peter North days are gone.
Die, motherfucker, die. Go to sleep. But we don't want to end this on a depressing note, because I know it is late over there for you, and I don't want you
to machine guns. I mean, I'm erect. I don't know about you.
I'll be awake for hours. So is there anything about MVP that we didn't get to talk about that you think people need to know?
Not really. I mean, I don't want to try, like, it's one of those movies. We got a lot of veterans involved. It was the first time doing it for a few of us. We shot on a low budget, and I think Nate really worked wonders on it. I think he's a really good dude doing really good things. He genuinely fucking cares about what he's doing. I mean, hopefully one day we will, but what I'll say is, like, this project was not about, we made fucking, like, me and him, like, made nothing out of this. It was a, you know, they call it, usually people do passion projects at the end of their career when they've got a lot of money. We kind of did this back to front, but like I said earlier, man, if it helps a couple of people, if it helps a couple of veterans, if it helps a couple of athletes, if it helps a couple of family members, then that's kind of what's important to me on it. And it's cool, bro. It's a privilege to be a part of something like this. It was really cool to go out there for the premiere and meet a lot of the veterans that were involved in it. Because I wasn't there for filming and everything because it was during COVID, so I couldn't travel to the US. So it was really great seeing those guys. Everyone smashed it, and it was really fucking cool to be part of a team effort. Like, books are a team effort. Don't get me wrong. You know, you can't do a book without your copy editors, your editors, you know, friends who give you opinions on it. Like, so books are a team effort, but a movie is, it's like we're talking like company scale, and it was really cool to be a part of something like that. I'm very grateful for it, and grateful to Nate, and grateful for everyone else that was part of it.
Well, it's amazing to hear. It is MVP, and it is out on Amazon Prime. It is in theaters. So go check it out. Geraint, where can we find you on social media?
At GRJ Books. I'm pretty heavily shadow banned from my tirades over the last couple of years. And also at Veteran State of Mind. We do the podcast over there. I've not been putting out that much content recently because I've been on the road for a couple of months, but we're kind of getting back into the swing of things now. We have great guests on there, and sometimes we just do rants and bants, which are a little bit, we just kind of look at politics and stuff and do it a little bit, try and make it a little kind of comedic, a bit like the Smoke Pit, really.
And there is a deep library of previous episodes that people can catch up on while they're waiting for new content. Like you said, you've had amazing guests like me. No, I'm kidding. But you've had people that are like Victoria Cross recipients and like just like a whole list of just amazing guests. So everyone, please check out Veteran State of Mind.
Yeah, bro. Like, there's one. If someone wants to around this kind of time of year. I reposted one recently with a guy called Harry Billinge, who he landed on Gold Beach on D-Day. He passed away earlier this year, but like one of his best lines in there was, "I never took a prisoner." So that will give you some insight into his mind, but like an absolute character. We've got a lot of American veterans on there. It's pretty much a 50-50 split with guests of US vets, British vets. We've had some Aussies on there. We try and mix it up. Sometimes we go really serious, and we'll kind of take a deep dive into a subject with someone maybe on kind of politics and things. And we've had guys like Carl Malentes on there, author of Matt Horn, obviously like quite a deep episode. And then we've had other episodes on who are just my mates, and we just take the piss.
Well, fantastic. Geraint, thank you so much for joining us again here on the Smoke Pit. You got any save rounds, anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with?
No, bro, just really good. I mean, the Smoke Pit was one of the reasons I started Veteran State of Mind. So it's always a pleasure to come on, mate. I'm glad things are going well for you. And for anyone listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking with the entire episode. Appreciate you guys. And just thanks very much, mate. Appreciate it.
Well, fantastic. Fair winds, following seas. We'll see you next time here in the Smoke Pit.